Out in the countryside, the stars are clearer, and you can mentally trace the lines of the constellations. Big Dipper, Little Dipper, and there in the distance, the constellation of Pegasus is visible. And this is just a squashed body of wasps on the windshield. Damn, the windshield washer fluid is out again. Today was so hot that I didn't want to linger outside that store any longer. God, that old geezer sold me the wrong cigarettes again. I'll have to smoke this crap. I need to stop. Marco veered off the highway and took a drag. At least there's a little breeze now. Still about 400 miles to go. The radio keeps playing the same news and songs. Some jerk robbed the local bank, and soon I'll be sick of listening to Musili Paloranti's old album. They'd better tell something new, or you can die of boredom and longing in this godforsaken place on this old heap of junk. Marco pondered on his journey for a couple of thousand pesos. He was delivering goods to a certain gentleman at the appointed place and time. Here, everyone earns however they can, whether it's a private business selling gum in vending machines or transporting people abroad. He used to have it all. A small cozy house in a little village. Far from civilization, but the nature was a delight to behold. You could walk down by the river and just contemplate, sitting on a rock with a straw in your mouth. And the crystal clear water beckoned with its babbling, as if listening to river nymphs. His beloved woman, marrying her was the right and happiest moment of his life. They dreamed of the future. Getting a dog, having 2 boys and 2 girls. They would help tend the cattle. The boys would carry on Marco's work. He raised cows. He gained a lot from it: milk, hide, meat. There was always enough money, even more than enough. They could afford to hire a maid to help his wife with household matters. It seemed like the perfect life. Until the darkest day of his life came. One day, on a beautiful day, everything was going as usual. His beloved wife was preparing a suckling pig for her beloved husband's birthday. Marco, meanwhile, went out into the yard to let out the cattle, when suddenly, his wife's piercing scream made Marco turn around. Fire spread from the window. The man rushed home with all his might to get his wife. And suddenly, a sharp bang deafened him, like a soldier being stunned by a shell exploding nearby. As it would later turn out, it was an explosion of a gas cylinder. A piece of reinforcement bar flew out at the speed of a champagne cork popping out of a bottle. A sharp blow to the head. It hit Marco directly. And the man blacked out. After several hours, when Marco opened his eyes, the house had already burned down to the ground. The man fell to his knees, and his cry pierced through all the surroundings, a terrible howl that made the blood freeze in one's veins. Marco ran to the still smoldering remains of his former home. He dug for a long time, hoping to find his wife's body. Covered in black soot, he turned around when he was called from the side. The lonely old man with a cane beckoned towards himself. They took her to the hospital, Marco. To the city. Santa Madre de Dios. There is still hope. Thank you, Senor Madrigal. Marco immediately headed to the city to his beloved wife. He questioned the nurses about where they had taken the young girl. However, all he heard in response were a few words: "She died from severe burns. We're very sorry." What a cruel life. First, it gifts you with fortunes, and then in one moment, takes everything away. Everything that burned had to be left behind. The couple of cows that survived now live on other farms. Marco spent a long time in prolonged binges trying to lose himself at the bottom of an empty glass. During this time, he accumulated a pile of debts, and only after several years did the pain begin to release him. He decided to pull himself out from the bottom. He found the strength within himself to start anew. But first, he simply had to rid himself of enormous debts. He found nothing better than to transport illegal goods across the border. They pay well and quickly. He needed to resolve his financial problems as soon as possible. Marco finished his cigarette, wiped away an unbidden tear on his rough cheek, and started his rusty wreck of a car. After driving a couple of miles, an old gas station appeared on his route, and something gleamed in the distance. As he approached closer, Marco discerned two silhouettes in the night shadows, a young girl with a child around 3 years old. She waved her hand, a signal for the driver to stop. "What are you doing in such a place at this late hour, Sonora?" "The place is so desolate that when I saw the light of your headlights, I was overwhelmed with excitement and happiness. I was afraid to stay there with Stelio forever and during the day walk along the road in such heat. You understand? Please, take us to the village of Valle Verde. Our car broke down. We left it a few miles back and started walking, hoping someone would give us a lift. Valle Verde, the Green Valley, it's my old village." "It can't be. I haven't been there in so long." "Just hearing the name makes me break out in a cold sweat," thought Marco. Any opportunity now is necessary to pay off the debts. Marco hesitantly agreed and gallantly opened the door for his fellow travelers. Unexpectedly for him, the girl was wearing such a light dress that even the slightest breeze caused part of the fabric to touch his face. It was as invigorating as a cup of the strongest coffee, especially if the aftertaste was strawberry-like, like the delicate scent of her perfume. "Do you live there? We want to visit old friends. I hope it's not out of your way, and we won't disrupt your route. By the way, my name is Consuela, and this adorable boy is called Stelio. Nice to meet you, I'm Marco, and I was actually wanting to see the sights there." In the darkness of the night, it's hard to make out the faces of passengers. But those eyes, the color of gooseberries, skin like dark velvet. The whole cabin was filled with such enticing fragrances. Marco glanced at Consuela in the mirror, catching her gaze before sharply refocusing on the road. "I noticed you were momentarily stunned when I mentioned where we're heading. Is something wrong?" The car started to pick up speed. Oncoming headlights flickered like falling stars. Cars zoomed by. The boy looked out the window and counted each passing car aloud. There's a red truck, and next to it, a green Ford passed by. Stelio enjoyed the sounds of the road and the whistling of passing trucks. "I'm familiar with this little village, Sonora. I used to live there before. But I had to move. Tell me about this place." "Well, where to begin? In this village, I witnessed the most beautiful sunsets on the edge of the rare forest. The air there is, how should I put it, so pure. Local birds sing so beautifully, especially when you're lost in thought. I like to sink my feet into the lush grass and feel the field flowers with every fingertip. There was my home and my beloved. Every morning I would herd cattle. And the local children laughed so joyfully. A lovely place to stay. How wonderful. So your name is Stelio. And how old are you?" Marco turned to the little boy drawing patterns on the foggy glass. The boy turned around, his face stretching into a wide smile. He nodded happily and held up 3 fingers. "He still doesn't speak properly. We're teaching him his first words. He's a charming little boy. Yes, but mischievous sometimes. Just recently he broke a crystal figurine in the local store. Had to cough up. Or here's another story. We once went into a cafe. Ordered the most delicious omelette. I literally stepped away for a minute to the ladies' room and left him finishing his milkshake. I come out, oh Dios mío. No child. I was so scared, thought he was kidnapped or wandered out onto the street. Turns out, this little rascal had hidden under the table, jumped out screaming. I nearly had a heart attack." The girl turned to the child, who bashfully hid his face in his cap. "Where's Dad? Why isn't he with you?" she asked. "Dad." The child's voice trailed off. "He's gone missing." "I'm so sorry." "What happened?" inquired Marco. "I'd rather not bring up that topic, sorry, Marco." Meanwhile, Marco glanced at the child and decided to pull over for a smoke break on the street. Consuela stepped out with him. "Care to offer the lady a cigarette?" Marco pulled out 2 cigarettes and offered one to the girl. In the firelight, her eyes gleamed brighter, green like ripe apples in the Garden of Eden. Marco had once fallen for green eyes. But in the darkness of the night, in the wilderness, he longed to see the stranger's face in the light of day. He could only make out the beautiful contours of her figure, her hair. Suddenly, his curiosity was interrupted by the piercing cry of some animal. The cry was so unsettling that shivers ran down his spine. Is that a coyote? It's possible, there are many around here. But I've never heard such sounds before. Hide behind me. Marco pushed Consuela behind him and slowly approached the source of the cry. The closer he got, the more his heart sank. Whether it was fear, disgust, or both, he couldn't tell. The source of the sound was now clearly visible. Yes, it was a wounded coyote, caught in a rusty trap. Poor thing. How did it manage this? We have to help it. No animal should die in such agony. Must be hunters, or worse, poachers. Marco bravely approached the injured animal, seemingly showcasing his fearlessness. But as soon as he touched the coyote's paw, it swiftly aimed its fangs straight at his hand. Maldito! Maldito perro! Beast! My hand! Marco pushed aside the trap and quickly released it. The animal disappeared into the sandy wilderness. We need to bandage the wound. We must. What if he's sick? With rabies? I have antiseptics in my purse. Let's go to the car, quickly. Two of them headed towards the car and were met by the frightened Stelio. Seeing Marco's wound, he started crying. He was incredibly scared at the sight of blood. Marco sat in the front seat, and Consuela, rummaging in her purse for a minute or two, found a bottle of alcohol. She carefully dipped a piece of cloth into the bottle and began treating the wounds of the victim of the nocturnal guest's attack. With tenderness and care, the damp cloth touched the wounds. Such small and gentle hands skillfully handled the task. For the first time in a long while, Marco felt calm from someone's touch. Somehow, for a moment, his soul felt light. Consuela placed the napkins she found in her purse on the wound and also bandaged it with a scarf. The scent of the scarf, enticingly seductive, enveloped Marco. It seemed he was beginning to fall in love with a stranger he barely knew, whose face was hidden in the darkness of the night. But what could he say to her? Soon they would have to part ways. Can you drive? Of course, am I some weakling? Afraid of a measly stray mutt. Don't make me laugh. Consuela sat in the passenger seat next to Stelio, hugged him tightly. The car continued its journey. You know, this reminded me of a joke. My grandfather used to tell it to me. Rest in peace, old man Ricardo. So, in the vicinity of a small settlement, there were many coyotes. They started stealing chickens and eggs. Well, the residents took measures. They set traps here, snares there, placed wolf pits in another place. But these critters weren't easily caught. All traps either didn't work or simply snapped shut without a coyote inside. So, the locals gathered for a town council meeting. They started addressing the problem and suggesting solutions. And one gentleman from the audience shouts out, "We need to be less cruel and more tolerant towards animals. Let's just catch them and castrate them. Maybe they'll stop breeding, and they'll die out to hell." And the headman responds, "You fool. They're not coming to screw our chickens." As soon as Marco finished his tale, there was silence in the car for a few seconds, so profound that you could hear a pin drop. Sweat broke out on Marco's forehead. Idiot. What a crappy story. Suddenly, Consuela's hearty laughter broke the funereal silence. Stelio, looking at his mom, also began to laugh, though he didn't understand a word. From the passengers' laughter, Marco couldn't help but join in. Ah, you sure know how to lighten the mood. Arriving at the outskirts of the village of Valle Verde, Marco's hands trembled uncontrollably. He tightly gripped the steering wheel of the car to steady them, but his hands refused to obey. Marco? Are you okay? Could it be that the madness virus is creeping up on you? Doubtful. You see, this village holds countless memories for me. Some of the happiest and most dreadful moments of my life are tied to this place. Here, I lost everything: my home, my wife, my hope, my faith. I haven't been here since the fire took the life of my beautiful Eliza. Coming back here, it's as if I can still catch a faint scent of smoldering wooden beams. I'm sorry. Marco's cheeks became moist with unbearable tears. He tried to suppress the overwhelming emotions, but his eyes relentlessly betrayed him, continuously shedding tears. A lump in his throat prevented Marco from uttering another word. It's okay, Marco. It's all in the past. You're strong, you can overcome this. You know what they say, the days that break you are the days that make you. You have to accept this pain and absorb it. Only then will it dissolve in your heart. The girl embraced Marco from the passenger seat. And in that moment, Marco felt a warmth spreading throughout his body. Like a bird shielding its chicks from inclement weather, she enveloped Marco's hands with hers, warding off the overwhelming emotions. You're so kind and gentle, Consuela. I haven't felt warmth from touch in so long. I see a small shop in the distance. Let's go there, we'll grab a couple of quesadillas. Stelio, are you in? The girl turned to the child, who nodded enthusiastically. Decision made. Marco started the car and drove for another mile. They stopped near a shop called Manzanilla. Here, Marco used to buy the newspaper every morning to check the weather, read local news, and find interesting stories for reading in the fields. Consuela stepped out of the car and entered the shop, where the familiar sounds of glass bells at the entrance rang painfully in Marco's ears. He sat down on a bench near the entrance. The sun was beginning to rise slowly. Will I see the sunrise from this bench again? It's been so long since I've done that at all. Marco lit a cigarette and effortlessly blew out a huge puff of smoke, running his hand over the wooden armrest, which was scratched with various insults and pictures with the names of local kids. Fernando was here. Luisan is a fool. If you're reading this, then get a life, idiot. Stop wasting your time. These inscriptions were so dear to his heart because Marco would always come across them with his eyes whenever he decided to sit on this bench. The familiar bells rang again. And here I am. What would you like, Marco? With beef or chicken, or maybe I just grabbed some with mushrooms. In the pouring light of dawn, whose rays gently fell on the unfamiliar woman's face, Marco could discern pleasant facial features. Her lips seemed as plump and tender as rose petals. The upturned nose hinted at a light-hearted nature. The same lightness was reflected in the girl's dress. Her hair's long curls carried the scent of perfume with hints of strawberries. Her eyes glowed like two emeralds in the light. Marco stared at the girl and began to realize with horror that it was as if he was seeing his Eliza before him. They must have sold him cigarettes laced with hallucinogens as he was experiencing hallucinations. But no. For another minute or two, he gazed at the contours of the face of the angel standing before him. Eliza? Surprise. The girl awkwardly uttered such an absurd phrase, it seemed. A surprise? Was this some kind of joke? Is it really you? I don't understand. Yes, darling. It's me. I've been waiting for so long for you to figure it out. Marco sat in shock and grave silence for another minute. Marco, I'm sorry, maybe it was cruel, but I didn't know how to break it to you. The man suddenly embraced the girl, and tears overwhelmed him again. He held Eliza so tightly that it seemed he might crush her spine. Such twists were entirely in Eliza's style. She always loved movies with unexpected appearances, arranging unexpected surprises. Eliza, but how? I was told you died. I searched for you for so long, darling. I spent 3 years looking for you, and finally found you, my love. She grabbed Marco's face with both hands and kissed him on the nose, lips, and cheeks. Her kisses were like an angel's touch. She took Marco's hand and sat down with him. She laid her head on his shoulder, and their gaze turned to meet the dawn. I remember that day. That awful day. The fire from the stove suddenly spread to the curtain. Oh, if only I hadn't opened the window that day. Then a sudden bang, and I don't remember anything else. I woke up in the hospital. They put me on a bunch of drips, treated several burns. I waited for you. But you didn't come. I thought you didn't survive. When I was discharged, I came to the ruins. My heart was breaking. I thought I lost you. I came to the hospital. They told me you didn't make it. In the hospital, I found out that Maria, our maid, was brought in with me. As soon as I could get out of bed, I started asking about her, wanting to visit her. But she passed away from severe burns. Later, I was told that she was pulling me out from under the debris, and she got burned so badly. Maybe they just got confused and thought you were asking about her. Rest in peace, Querida Maria. It was also in the hospital where I found out I was pregnant. Our dear Stelio became the only treasure you left me. But, Eliza, I don't understand. How did you find me, or was it the Almighty who brought our destinies together again? After spending several days in grief, I met Senor Madrigal. He told me that you were alive and that you were looking for me. But soon after, I learned that you had left the village altogether in an unknown direction. I searched for you for a long time, but unsuccessfully. I believed that one day I would find you, my dear Marco. And it happened. You're here, standing right in front of me, just like in those days. I wandered through the local towns, asking about you. When Stelio was born, I was infinitely happy. He has your eyes and your gaze. So serious and yet so kind. Once I got a job as a waitress in the town of Gran Colina. They paid little, but it was enough for a single mother's life. One day, one gentleman was my visitor. We started talking. He had problems with his business. I comforted him. I told him my story to show him that he wasn't alone and that there are things scarier than that. And his drunken gaze turned to me. He stared into my eyes for a long time, and then he said, I know a guy who had a similar story. I dropped the glass in surprise. It shattered into pieces. And I realized he was talking about you, Marco. He told me he works with you, that he's your, what do you call it, partner. He gave me the coordinates of your route, and I immediately started searching. For several months, I came to that gas station hoping to see you. I stopped every passing car. And then came the day when it was you, Marco. You've traveled such a long way to meet me, and I, like a coward, abandoned everything, believing those doctors. Don't blame yourself, dear, it's life, you just didn't know the whole truth. Marco hugged Eliza tightly and started spinning around with her. I have a son. I have my Eliza. How grateful I am to fate that there is still justice in this world. How happy I am. So now you're involved in transporting illegal goods across the border? Are you carrying something right now? Yes, darling, that's true. But because of these events, I'll finish this job and quit. We'll rebuild our home here and live as we did before. I don't believe in what happened. Sweetheart, stay in this village with Stelio, and I'll finish up and come to you in a couple of days. We'll start our life anew. That sounds wonderful, my love, but I don't want to part with you again. It's too dangerous to travel with me, especially with Stelio. I promise, as soon as I finish, I'll come straight to you. For several hours, the reunited family hugged, laughed, and rejoiced in life. Then, Marco started his jalopy, kissed Eliza and Stelio goodbye, and drove off towards the city. He drove half a day at such a speed to make up for lost time, and by evening, he reached the designated spot. It was a desolate place, an abandoned dump. The stench there was so overwhelming that tears welled up in his eyes. He didn't want to stay there for long, not at all. It felt like a whole container of dead rats had been soaked in foul urine and then left to simmer under the hot desert sun. Marco was lucky, his boss hadn't arrived yet. He had time to rest for 10 minutes and smoke a cigarette. Marco was filled with emotions of boundless happiness. He was about to start his life anew. The sad chapter of his book would close, and a bright epilogue would begin, where they lived happily ever after. Finally, Marco heard the sound of tires crunching on old beer cans. The headlights illuminated him. An old Ford stopped a few meters away from him. Marco stood in a serious posture, frowning, not showing that anything had changed in his life. This was no simple matter. A chubby man in a white greasy suit and some of his men swaggered out of the car. He slowly paced back and forth and headed straight for Marco. "Hello, today, as always, it's 10 kilograms. Open the trunk." Marco opened the trunk. Four faces scrutinized its contents. "Well done, Marco, you never let important people down. Show the suitcase with the money." "Marco, why so serious? I brought as much as needed, there's no need to check." Marco fell silent for half a minute. They brought him a suitcase, which, to his surprise, seemed too light, as if there was nothing inside at all. Glancing at the boss, he felt like there was a barely noticeable smirk on his face. Marco immediately opened the suitcase. There were only a few pesos at the bottom. "Oh dear, Marco." The cat's curiosity got him into trouble. The man aimed the gun towards Marco. "Did you think people in this business have honor? Ah, you bastard. You thought you could deceive me? I was carrying this crap across the border. I was almost caught by the police. And you want to do this to me? It's just business, nothing personal. We found a new supplier. And we don't need any extra witnesses." Marco managed to dodge before the man pulled the trigger. The bullet flew just inches from Marco's face. "You can't hide from me. You son of a bitch." Marco knew that the business bringing him money was dangerous, so he wisely bought a gun from a small-time thug in the alley. And now, it was his time. Marco swiftly pulled out his Glock and started firing relentlessly at the enemy's legs. Bang! A kneecap shattered. Another one. A foot pierced through. Several bullets missed. Bodies of men fell to the ground. Wild cries echoed throughout the dump. The noise startled a flock of crows, rising up to the stars. Marco hid behind a car and aimed his gun at one, then another. Bang! And another shot. Driven mad by the sight of blood, Marco stood up. Where's the third one? A thought flashed through his mind. One of the thugs had vanished into the garbage heaps. Without waiting for further maneuvers, Marco grabbed the car keys, jumped into the driver's seat, and tried to start the engine. Damn clunker. The car wouldn't start. After calming down for a few seconds, he gently pressed the keys, and the jalopy roared to life. As Marco drove away from that godforsaken place, a sudden bullet pierced through the windshield. The car disappeared into the desert. Several months had passed since that incident. Marco was tormented by guilt. But now, he was starting life anew. With Eliza, they rented a cozy house on the outskirts of the village, bought a couple of cows and a dozen chickens. Everything fell into place. Stelio loved spending time with his father. There was a lot of work to be done, farming chores, taking care of the livestock. They needed to reopen the cattle and bull breeding business. Especially now, when people needed meat and milk. They would be willing to pay hefty sums. One beautiful day, on his veranda, sipping freshly brewed coffee and reading the newspaper, Marco's gaze fell upon one column in the crime section. 2 men's bodies were found at the dump on the southern highway. Wait, I was just there recently. According to a local drunkard who discovered the bodies, they were buried in a pile of garbage. The bodies were sent for identification. Despite the partially decomposed tissues, the identities of the deceased were established. They turned out to be 36-year-old Fernando Leonel and 45-year-old Guillermo Fuentes, both recently released from prison. However, it was determined that at least 2 more people were present at the crime scene, judging by the boot prints in the hardened mud. Preliminary data suggests the murder was committed with particular brutality. Anyone with specific information or knowledge of these individuals, please contact local law enforcement. Holy Mother of God! Something happened, darling? Yes, food prices are going up again. These officials never care about the common folk. Marco's alarmed gaze returned to the newspaper. Boot prints, they'll find other traces soon. I can't lose everything again. Not this time. What if they find my blood or fingerprints? No. I can't allow that. Will I have to go into hiding or will it all blow over? And that third one? I thought he was injured and bleeding out in that damn dump. What if he's also looking for me? Stelio. Stelio. Marco immediately called out to the child, overcome with growing anxiety. But the boy didn't respond. Stelio, sweetheart. Let him chase the chickens, you know he enjoys that. What if he's gone missing or something bad happened to him? What bad could happen in such a beautiful place, darling? Eliza placed her small, delicate hand on Marco's shoulder. It's all behind us, beloved. Now we're together again. Marco jumped up from his chair, almost dropping his cup of coffee, and frantically called for Stelio, searching the property. Stelio. A little head peeked out from behind the shed. Yes, Papa? Stelio called Marco Papa for the first time, squeezing Marco's heart even tighter. Never disappear like that, little one. You scared me. Marco hugged the child so tightly that he went limp in his arms. Marco surveyed the surroundings. Everything was in order. A gentle breeze rustled the green leaves of the acacia tree, a thin stream murmured with crystal clear water, and swallows flew through the sky, singing their symphonies.